Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our second installment of Coffee Convos. My name is Sam Martin, and I am the founding artistic director of Cincinnati Song Initiative. And we're very, very excited to welcome you and introduce today's two wonderful, brilliant guests, Daryl Taylor of the African American Art Song Alliance and Martha Guth, co-founder of Sparks and Wiry Cries. And we are going to delve into a lot of details about both of these two individual art song groups, as well as brainstorm and explore a little bit about what the future of art song looks like and how our various organizations can move on during this weird and wacky time, and how we can experiment. So welcome, Martha and Daryl, and we're of course joined by Laura as well. So happy Saturday morning.
Is it morning? I thought it was still Friday night.
Maybe, actually, it may be like you, especially on the West Coast, right?
Daryl wins the MVP. He's on the West Coast. It's 8 a.m. over there. Thank you for being here.
All the birds are saying, "What are you doing up?"
You're the one waking the birds up.
So, Daryl, why don't we start with you? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and African American Art Song Alliance and kind of the core tenets of the group?
Oh gosh, I mean that's a long discussion, and I can give you the short version. The short version of it is that the African American Art Song Alliance. I myself am an active performer, and the African American Art Song Alliance seeks to raise up marginalized composers, especially, but marginalized performers as well, and scholars, and bring our disparate activities nationwide and internationally into focus, and so that we can all have a larger platform and more informed platform, and a standard by which we expect work to go forward.
Very cool.
African American art song, African American composers especially.
Yeah, you have a website, and you also have a very active Facebook group, right, where there's a lot of dialogue and discussion.
Right. So the website is artsongalliance.org, and that's a kind of the brick and mortar of it, and where the profiles and a tremendous number of links and information. It's like a nesting doll, you look in this, and then there's something. It's always intended to be that way, always informational. It has something for everybody. At least that's the intention, so that if you're just at the very beginning of your inquiry, there's something for you. But then if you're really deep in your inquiry, there should be some higher level of research and discussion. We're especially focused on not recognizing the subset of what has been relegated as a subset of women composers, recognizing that is not acceptable. They cannot continue to be a subset, and that it takes a proactive, affirmative action to raise them out of that place of neglect, and to be intentional in our focus on women composers especially.
Great. Martha, welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about Sparks? We love Sparks. We want you to share Sparks with everybody else.
Yeah, Sparks began as a way of getting past my boredom on an opera gig. It was a long time ago. I was in Ottawa in my hotel room, as we so often are, just sort of, like drumming my fingers a little bit. And I have insomnia. And so I got to sleep by listening to podcasts. And I thought, and it was Mark Maron's podcast actually to begin, and I thought, why isn't there something like this around art song? This is my passion. I mean, I love opera, obviously, but song is where I felt at home, and I thought, why isn't this a thing that has happened? And so I thought, well, maybe I can do that. And I asked my really wonderful colleague Erica Switzer, pianist, if she would join me in that venture. And so it just was housed on my own personal website for a while, and then we got a grant from the Canada Council to grow it into its own site. And then we gradually added through the beautiful faith and trust of an organization called the Casement Fund. It grew into a presenting organization, and so there are these three arms. So we now do a festival, a very small festival, but a presenting festival in every January. And we have this website that houses blogs and articles by scholars, and also tries to lift up the genre as a whole by talking about other art song presenters and art song organizations, and getting their profile hopefully lifted through us a little bit as we grow. And what else? We've ended up in a number of different areas, but generally, yeah, it just came out of that passion for loving song.
While we're with you, just tell us a little bit about the Song Slam, which is basically your guys's creation, which is taking off like wildfire all across the country with other art song organizations, and you guys are kind of like the hub for it.
Yeah, so that was another idea that I was thinking about. We were trying to grow the audience. We all put so much passion, work, and time, effort into these recitals that are often heavily researched and beautifully crafted, with themes and narratives and all sorts of things that we put together. And quite often, what is the case, at least for our small organizations, is that the audience, while dedicated and passionate as well, seemed, quite honestly, is not as large as we would hope. And so I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about reaching out, like, where do we reach out? How do we figure out the ways in which we can draw more people in? And I started thinking about poetry, which also is a solitary pursuit, but the outward pursuit of that is the poetry slam. Right. And so I thought, okay, maybe we can put this together in some way. So the idea is that you get teams of singer, pianist, and composer, and sometimes poet, though the composer is certainly able to use a text in the public domain, or a text where they have where they have either talked to the trust of the poet, or they've reached out to the poet themselves and they've given permission. And so then people come together, and the sign up for this competition is first come, first served. The registration opens up at a certain day and time. And so it's very sort of democratic that way. And then the audience votes on $2,000 worth of prize money. And what that does is that it takes away the gatekeepers, and but what it also does is bring in an audience. So because people want their claque to participate, right? And interestingly, more people come to support this, we have found, than just if you are saying, I'm singing a recital in such a place in such a time, because the audience is invested in the outcome. And the other thing is that the publicity for these things has been really, really positive. I think that somehow, because of this format, we've been able to get generally in different cities quite a lot of publicity for these events. And so it's not just the claque that shows up. So you get a little bit of evening out in terms of who people are voting for. What else can I say about it? We've also found that it's an incredible community builder for the artists themselves, that they find that they meet their colleagues. And because the prize money is not so large, it's and it's usually divided amongst the team, what do I want to say? It's not such a huge thing if your piece doesn't get chosen. You know, it's just the idea of coming together and collaborating, and that has been really the joy of it.
So cool. CSI did our first song slam with you guys back in January, and of course it was a hit, and we had so much fun, and we look forward to doing it again. So it's just such a, I think it gets so much attention, and it's getting attention because it truly is like a unique way to present what it is that we, usually do, but it's this whole new packaged delivery. So it's super cool. Daryl, tell us about the we were talking yesterday. Every 5 years, you host a conference.
Well, yeah, it's not for lack of interest that we only do it every 5 years. It's for lack of my energy and verve and time availability. So we started in the Alliance was formed in 1997. And so about 2007, I thought, okay, we've been at this for 10 years. We should mark the occasion with a conference and bring folks together. And I started it mostly because I was always interested in a festival of African-American composers, especially because all the art song festivals that I could see really kind of neglected that repertoire. Mm-hmm. And so I said, well, what do you do with things that are neglected? You have to bring attention to it. And I started it with just the notion of just bringing together some of my like-minded colleagues. I remember when I'm on the faculty at the University of California, Irvine, and I presented it, to the chair of our department, saying, this is what I'd like to do. And he says, well, will people come? I said, listen, if 15 people come, we'll have a conference of 15 people. Well, a lot more than 15 people came, and it was a lot of interest. And as part of that, we always put together this rather significant document to mark the occasion. Because we only do it every 5 years, then it becomes a kind of a chronological marker of this is how our progress is going. And it's been interesting to see the incremental progress. So we do it every 5 years. So we did it for the 10th, the 15th, last one was our 20th anniversary. And hopefully, COVID allowing, we'll do another one in 2022. One way or the other, we'll figure out how to do it, but I'd love to do it live and in person. We usually present it over a 4-day period in the second weekend in February. And I've never gotten anyone complaining saying, oh God, we have to come to Southern California in February. So it's usually a good time for doing that. And if we for some reason are not able to do that in 2022, God forbid, but then we would move it to, I'm thinking of September 2022, but I have to start planning now. Now is the time to start, because it is a lot of cogs that move. It's not one performer, it's not one performance, it is a ton of stuff. And the last one, fortunately, we partnered with the Hamsong Foundation, and they live streamed everything. I did not have enough bandwidth to handle that, and they came in and graciously covered a number, not all of them, but a number of the performances, and not only live streamed it, but then housed it on their Vimeo, Vimeo site. I always get confused and have to think between Venmo and Vimeo.
Me too.
On their Vimeo site, and then they were gracious enough to allow us to also house that on our YouTube site, which has it. I found that for our repertoire in particularly, you have to engage the interest and the imagination of people, and you have to go beyond the presuppositions. There, when you talk about African American music to the average Joe Blow, they don't really, the first thing they go to is not usually George Walker or H. Leslie Adams, when you talk about African American music and contribution to music. And so we have a large amount of correcting, oh, not correcting, but
Reorienting.
amplifying the information stream. Because you can love what you love, but love it because that's what you chose to do, not because you didn't know there was something else that was available to you.
So much of this is really about what we're exposed to and being able to, exactly what you're saying, to allow all of these plates, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Daryl.
Well, and I was just thinking the whole notion of the alliance came together because my good friend and colleague Louise Toppin and I were grad students at the University of Michigan together, and when we and she was very gracious to me. She uh, introduced me to a ton of repertoire, and and she was slightly ahead of me. And was really inspirational, was a mentor for me. And then when we both graduated, we found ourselves crisscrossing oftentimes. And where are you going? I'm going to do a presentation on African American arts. Oh, so am I. And we had a real frank discussion. And I said, Louise, I don't want to be in competition with you. I don't want to work across purposes from you. I will never disrespect you. I would never disrespect the University of Michigan. Why would I? This is the germ that birthed me. But I said, it wouldn't it be more powerful for us to work together and to just check each other's schedules, make sure that we're not working at cross purposes, and as we're doing that, also to establish certain standards by which, um, if you wanted to be part of this sort of thought, this is what you should be doing, and not what you must be doing, but what you should be doing. And that became the nexus of the Art Song Alliance. Also, I I did this research project with Willis Patterson. Willis Patterson was the person that compiled the anthology of art songs by Black American composers in 1977, and he was my grad advisor at Michigan. I did this independent study with him, and as part of that, he made me to do a 30-page paper. I did it on the importance of studying African American art song. He was duly impressed and suggested that I publish that in the Journal of Singing. I did, and as part of that, Nats suggested I put together an appendix of publisher information, a list of composers and publisher information, and I did that. And this was in the 90s. I said, well, I want someplace for other people to access this because it was so hard for me to come by, and that's when I then put it online, and it became the alliance. But to your point, what I was wanting to say was, with all of this preamble, was that it is so empowering to know that you're not working alone, that you are working in a community, and that your work is there's room at the table for everybody, and it's not a threat to your work. Your artistic individuality and your ability to think and to reason are not isolated, but are only amplified and enhanced by the whole community or effort, the whole community effort.
Mhm.
That is such an amazing, important thing, I think, that you're saying. We have, I think it's really interesting because you're coming from, art song in and of itself is such a small genre,
Mhm.
and within classical music, and historically hasn't been just, like we said, the audiences are generally small and all of that. And so, I think it is really important for all of us in these groups to say, we are not in competition. The idea is that we collaborate, that this kernel of what art song actually is between pianist and singer, that marriage, that equal marriage, then is able to blossom and be bigger, right? And just if you can take that kernel and then put it on everything that you do, we lift up the entire genre as a whole. and it just becomes, so that we're not saying I'm in competition with you because we're presenting 2 art song recitals in the same city or something like that, which makes no sense at all to me. Yeah.
Talk about splitting the vote.
Right. Yeah.
Amongst an already small.
I know, but actually, if we lift each other up and propose and support and attend and advertise for, and it seems to me that if our goal is to grow audiences and awareness and all of that stuff, that actually should be at the heart of everything we do. That kind of equal collaboration.
It's actually foundational to the mission of the Art Song Alliance is the notion that you can't withhold repertoire, saying this is mine. It's only for me to perform. What I've said many times is that whoever heard of only one performance of Knoxville Summer 1915. It's impossible for any work to enter into the mainstream, and that's also one of the main goals of the Alliance. It's not to continue in the margins, but to move into the mainstream and to recognize that this is music for general consumption and for the world to not only to consume but also to perform.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, are there any specific points, Daryl, that you want people to know and to help raise that awareness that it is for general consumption? Do you find that there's a reticence to delve into that repertoire, or is it simply just a lack of knowledge and understanding that it's there?
I think it's a combination of those things, of those factors. As Martha said, art song in and of itself is a rather pristine, lofty milieu. It's a place that of high goals and ideals, ostensibly, and so in and of itself, opera. If you think about opera being already having a niche market, as it were, art song, it's even more niche. But then inside of that are these other kernels and germs of interests that, because it's so small and so select, sometimes it's easy to think that, oh, we've done everything that needs to be done, because after all, we've done all this Schubert and we've done all this and then you turn your gaze to America and say, oh, we forgot about America. Oh, well, let's do some Copland and let's do some McDowell and let's do some Ives. And you think that it is easy to buy into the whole notion that you have exhausted it, because after all, it was enough for you to even consider that there's something in that corner. But I think it's one of the great truths of this enterprise is that the more you look into it, the more you find that there are these sub ideas, and that doesn't necessarily degrade the whole. It makes it more positive. It's like a stew, and when you find that there's this big old chunk of onion in here that is unique. It has a particular taste. It adds to the flavor of the stew. It doesn't degrade the onion and it doesn't degrade the stew, but I do myself a disservice if I don't taste it. If I don't recognize that's a unique taste for in the stew or on the table, or however you want to present it.
Well, and how boring is a stew without any onions in it? Am I right?
Very boring.
but to go to more to your point, there are some regular anticipatable. Is that a word? Anticipatable.
It is now.
Yeah.
It was said here.
There are some problems that we can anticipate whenever you use the moniker African American. There are sensitivities that there's people that it kind of underscores the whole historical tension in our country, and it's like if I don't look at that stain in the bathroom, then it doesn't exist. I don't want to call it a stain. We're not a stain, but if I don't look at that package that's been delivered from Amazon, then it doesn't exist. But it still exists. It's still there. You're just not looking at it. And you really should confront the reason why you're afraid of looking at that package. And it really does, keeping African American in our moniker as opposed to saying all American music and inclusive, of African American, but saying specifically African American, forces anyone that comes to the table here to confront some of those things. Invariably, we have performers that come to it and they think that, oh, this is African American art song. Oh, it's not for me. I'm not supposed to do that. And a good amount of that comes from the history of minstrelsy in this country, and the way that, not just in this country, but the way that Black culture has been misrepresented and disrespected. And so people that want to come to it respectfully, understandably, have a little bit of hesitation. Well, I don't want to make a misstep. I don't want to, being an ally and well-intentioned, to make a misstep and do something that's a faux pas. And so they take very ginger steps, and as well one should. If I go to Austria, I'm not going to start singing Austrian and singing German and tell the Austrians, no, this is how it's supposed to be done. I'd look like a fool to do that. If I go to do that, I need to go in with my ears open and say, okay, I'm here to receive, and I'm new to this. Perhaps I have some Austrian parentage. I really want to understand this enterprise, but I can't assume that just because I've done things this way that it is necessarily the way that it should always be done.
Well, you're so right. And it goes exactly to your point of just starting to have these conversations and ask and open up the table, because of course, I mean, with your analogy, theoretically, the Austrians, we think, maybe the Austrians isn't the right nationality to use, but we think that they want others to come and learn about their music, even though it requires listening and educating and stuff. Same thing with the African American community, right? I mean, there's no desire to keep it closed.
Well, what I do know is this, and I can speak with some fair authority, is I don't know any Black composer that wants to be sung only by Black singers.
Exactly.
Paul Laurence Dunbar wrote poetry, great poetry. I don't think that he wrote that poetry, even though he wrote it from the Black perspective, that he wrote it for a Black audience or for a Black gaze. Now, there are some performers. African American culture is not monolithic. There are people that think all kinds of different ways. There are people that don't want to be called African American at all. I have my stepbrother who has a running sort of a fight online because he says, we're not from Africa. But African American doesn't mean that you're from Africa. It means you're. It has a very clear, distinct, and academic usage. But there are people that take umbrage with that sort of thing, and so with that, I'm very intentional in telling people that you will get criticized. I get criticized for doing this repertoire, and it comes from people's either lack of understanding or lack of empathy or for whatever reason, and you have to accept it. What I tell my students all the time is you have to play to your supporters and not your detractors. And I tell them, they crucified Jesus, so that you can live a holy life and still not be embraced by everybody.
Yeah.
Well, that's right. You're not going to please everyone. I mean, I think that for that so much of this also is just about the health of this of our community in general. That if we don't do this, then perhaps all of those oh my gosh, the naysayers of people who are like, oh, this art form is dying, oh, this, all of that stuff. This actually, if we actually had representation across the entire population of the United States, of North America, then perhaps we wouldn't be saying those things. But we don't have representation. And actually we are just, in sense, a transplant of a culture that came along.
It really all goes to some of.
So we need, in order to actually say.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Did I?
I think
No, that's fine.
Martha's
Please.
the internet skipped a beat.
Okay.
Okay.
There is a big gap in terms of we have our children, we send them to school, we expect them to have exposure to a broad element of things. And when we were children, or when I was a child, I'm older than you all. When I was a child, we got exposed to symphony and a broad range of things. And then as you get a little bit older, you make some choices of what things move you, and you can do more focused attention to science or to whatever your interests are. The unfortunate thing is that the arts in this country are seen as ancillary or secondary or disposable, and instead of thinking of STEAM, they think STEM. And that's where the resources go. And so then you have this huge gap in the education of young people, and those that have parents that have that put some importance on that can fill that with piano lessons or private study and that sort of thing. But whoever heard of a parent saying, well, now, if you want your child to know biology, you're going to have to invest in them doing that privately. No, it's foundational to their education, and therefore expected that they will have certain exposures going forward. Well, then when those people have children, they have that as their groundwork of what they think is important. And at the same time, with this ubiquitous exposure to popular music, there's no getting away from it. You can't go down any street without hearing, being exposed to that sort of thing. If that is the end of your investigation into music, well, then it's a huge leap from that into understanding Berg or understanding David Baker, or I mean, you get what I'm saying. Is the big thing that we have to turn accept that that the currently arts education is not is underfunded and undervalued. To recognize that arts is foundational to the understanding of humanity. We are not secondary. We are foundational to understanding of what makes us human, not the fact that we can compute. My computer can compute. Can my computer feel? It can't. Well, who knows eventually what's coming. Have you been watching Westworld? I have.
The robots will take over eventually.
but currently, as we understand the world, that is the thing that we are the binding element between technology and the animal kingdom. Animal kingdom doesn't compute, but they do feel, and they do express themselves. We can compute, and we do feel, and we can express ourselves. And if we don't have that, if we don't accept that, the institution does not support it. Vote in people that do, and be real active in that. And in the meantime, we have to do what we're doing, which is to be present and raising the standard, so that when people do come to what we do, it's they're greeted by something that they want to continue to be part of.
Right.
Yeah.
It makes me think about, and I mean, this is something that I think we as arts organizations have an obligation to talk about. But the responsibility that we have, especially now during this time of pandemic, when there's a lot of political and social unrest, and I'm sure everyone has seen it. There's just an absolute outpouring of creativity on social media. All the artists feel the need to engage somehow, and it just begs the question, like, what do we do as the leaders of, granted, a fairly niche market in classical art song, but what is our responsibility in creating art, encouraging creativity, and keeping, like, for me, I think it's more than just a morale boost. I think it's something that we have a literal responsibility to, like, keep it alive and encourage people to keep creating. But I guess it just kind of opens up the floor to all y'all. What are your thoughts about, like, our responsibility as leaders? And just, it's clear that there's a desperate need for art and creativity, and it's systemically being squashed.
Yeah, where do we go?
Yeah.
But I say yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we do have a responsibility. Those that have some sort of awareness, and a responsibility not just to raise awareness of what has been created, but also to empower creativity and inquiry from young minds or to other minds. Grandma Moses, the artist,
Yes.
when she was rather past the age of where we would expect, and yet was able to make a certain impact. And so I think that just having a welcoming sort of space and saying, and what does your soul say, and how can you create it? I was talking the other day about how, of course, the silver lining of the pandemic is that we're all getting a lot more savvy about technology, and
Oh, yes.
or suck your thumb in a corner. But from the pandemic and the social unrest and the great amounts of upheaval that we're experiencing currently, all of that is this big old ball of to quote a Temptations song, a ball of confusion. It's a ball of pain. And we can either look at the pain and say, "Ugh, I don't want anything to do with that." Artists generally don't do that. And the human experience tells us through artists that we take that pain and say, "This is how this makes me feel," or this is, and we make a historical marker of it. And we also make a soulscape of our experiences. And I think that this is going to be our as vivid and as flourished as the arts were in the 1920s. This is going to be our time of that where there's going to be a great flourishing of art in response to all of this pain. Pain is a friend to art. Suffering is a friend to art.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that we do have a responsibility as, I think this idea of leader is very uncomfortable because I think most of us in these programs, Daryl, this probably actually doesn't necessarily apply to you, because I think you were very intentional in the way it seems from the story you tell about how you started it. But I think that, I started Sparks with Erica because it was this sort of little passion project, and there was no thought of leadership really at the beginning of all of that. And yet here we are, 12 years later or so, and we've built something that we're really proud of. And I think then it is clearly the time to turn our attention to that, to how we can do better. I think that there has been some past attempts in terms of many of these things, of acknowledging all of the social issues and changes and things that are happening now. But yeah, better. that there are more seats at the table, that there are that the board is a place that can change in a very specific way. Administratively, I mean, we're very small in terms of even in terms of administration, because we tend to do these things all on our own. And so it depends on what you're asking, because you also then need to be able to pay. So depending on budget size. But I think that, to me, what we need to do is look exactly internally and then be able to reflect that outwards. I don't know. Is that the question, Laura?
Yeah, no, it wasn't so much a direct question so much as it is just, I truly think that this is just an open-ended dialogue discussion amongst all of us who are even remotely engaged in creating art. And I think especially now, like Daryl was saying, we have all kind of begrudgingly become very tech savvy. And I think, and Sam and I don't know, maybe we can open this up for discussion a bit, but Sam and I we went back and forth definitely for weeks, possibly months, over how to keep creating meaningfully and intentionally during this time when we can't do what has been, I guess, industry standard, like art song recitals and concerts for, that's been the case for a century and a half, and we can't do that anymore. So how do we stay relevant and still create meaningful art without rendering ourselves obsolete?
Yeah.
I think we've been going back and forth on it for months.
You guys have chosen an incredibly beautiful, intentional path, I think, with all of these amazing platforms for discussion. At Sparks, we have decided we are definitely in January going to go remote with our the way we're going to present these commissions that we've been discussing for about 2 years now. But in general, I think we have really used this time to internalize and see where we can go, to redirect, we had a very focused mission, but then to say, what does that mean right now? And how can we make that incredibly special? And how can we, again, lift the genre itself? How can we, how can we just bring more voices to the table? Yeah. So that's what we've decided, but it does mean that we have, in a sense, right now, kind of not done as much as I've seen many people doing outwardly, which is also very beautiful, and I'm so grateful for it. You know?
There's there can be no right answer during this time, because this time is so unprecedented, and organizations are only reflections of the individuals who are running them, and everybody is dealing with this differently, and everybody has different thoughts. And I think to your point, Martha, about missions, I think we're either going to see actual mission statements change, or the definition and the thinking about how missions can be served will expand or shift.
Or maybe that our own thinking was too narrow to begin with, and that that our mission does actually incorporate wider thought than we personally were thinking.
I think it's very interesting that the late 50s through the 60s, even into the early 70s, the turn was moving in terms of song and classical music was moving 12 tone, atonalism, and very expressive
Serial, yeah.
serial composition. And I think that it's interesting that the lion's share of compositions I see coming forward from young people don't embrace that at all. And I don't think it's because they're not smart enough to get it. I think that it was kind of a sort of a phase that music went through, and there are some things that they looked at and say, okay, if I want to use that, I can. But it's interesting that by continuing to do and allowing people the breath and the space to compose in a way that reflects what they genuinely want, it's interesting that they didn't seize on these more scientific and angular ways of doing things. Now, there are some exceptions. There are people that do still, write serially and with serial technique, and there are people that do write atonally. But it's interesting that when you give it to the people and say, what do you want to hear? That having organizations that respond to that, that oxygen is given to these rather mellifluous expressions, and so a composer like Juliana Hall, or a composer like Lori Laitman, or a composer like H. Leslie Adams can rise and have their audience support them without a fear of being presented in some sort of degraded way of say, well, that's not very serious. No, it's very serious. It's just you have an audience and you're responding to that audience, and that audience connects with you and directly to your heart without this academic filter.
Well, and I've also heard so many people use now serial music very specifically in a way that is way more lyrical and digestible, I suppose. Now, and maybe it's just having the perspective of 100 years of serial music at your fingers. Yeah, I remember a song cycle that I happily got to premiere by Andrew Stanneland, and one of the movements was serial, and I didn't even know it until he pointed it out. And I thought, oh, I didn't realize it, but it was so beautiful in its lyricism. And I really don't know if anybody would have, except that the structure underneath was so amazingly tight and beautiful, and the textures that he was creating, so creative. And so I think maybe, to me, again, it's a matter of having all of that information and then drawing all these threads that makes it magical.
Well, I guess more to my point was that there was a time when song composition and before there was this profusion of art song organizations that where people could go, you had to go through institutions, and those institutions were more concerned with advancement of new thought and it could be stymieing to composers' voices, and that having an area where you can just let the success of your artistic expression rise or fall based on, are people listening? Do they want to hear it again? That's the important thing. Have they heard it? Do they want to hear it again? And of course, great art requires often repeated viewings or repeated hearings. You have to hear things multiple times in order to get into the depth of things. I remember working on Bach on the St. Matthew Passion. I was doing 6 performances as evangelist, 6 performances in 7 days. But that's grueling. That is on tour. So they weren't all in the same place. So we on a bus tour, going around Spain. About the 5th performance, I started getting depth of understanding. Now, mind you, clearly, I didn't just start listening when I arrived. I'd been listening and uh, working through it. But about the 5th performance, I said, "Oh my God, how could I not have heard this?" Here I've been working with this, and I'm hearing these words going, and another 10 performances out, who knows what I would have come to understand. I think to that end, the fact that Fisher D. Scow and Gerald Moore could do recordings of the same works and come up with very different performances speaks to that, the whole notion that great art, when you look at it and look at it repeatedly over time, you'll come to differing understandings of things. If you've ever sat in front of the Mona Lisa, well, one, you'll be disappointed to say, "Oh, it's so small." And it's very difficult, of course, because there's so many people packed in front of it. But if you invest time to sit in front of it, great art, as you sit in front of it, it transforms you, and the art itself is transformed by you saying, "Oh, there's this," and it's very interesting. I also found that working with living composers is that sort of way that composers, if you are that sort of artist that are not just dealing with things on the surface level, but dig in deeper. When Juliana Hall and I were working on her Mistress Mind, we were working in her studio, and I would point out things about not just about the poetry, but about what she had created, and she said, "Oh gosh, I hadn't seen that," and it wasn't the first time that I'd ever had that sort of conversation with a composer to say, "Oh gosh, I didn't realize that these things did this." Yeah, well, but you created something that's great when you can recognize that it's a lot more than just the surface stuff. That has repeated hearings are going to bring out subtle hues that you hadn't expected.
I love that. I think that's one of the gifts of working with living composers. I mean, we spend so much time, analyzing the language of Schubert, for example, and it seems like because, when we commission or when we learn a new work, we don't have the luxury of all of the history of why Schubert might have done what he did and why he worked with a certain poet and all of that stuff. And that is wonderful information to have. So with every single new composer, it's like we are starting fresh and we need to learn an entirely new language. And often I find I catch myself doing this all the time. I will say, "Oh, that composer could not possibly have meant this. She meant that." Which is so ridiculous, because always, 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 never has it been any other case. By about the 3rd, 4th, 5th time I've gone into it, I go, "Oh, yeah, duh. Obviously."
That's
In fact, it's exactly what they meant. But we do that, right? Because we have this context and not enough of the new composers. So it almost takes it does take twice the work, right? Because you have to create and understand the actual language of the composer first. But it is also that's the responsibility, but it's also the joy of that, because you get to create, then you feel like part of the creation process.
Right. Well, I have never wanted, as a performer, I've never wanted to be a parrot. No. I don't see myself as a parrot. I'm not just somebody that's just going to squawk out, "Oh, it's said to be soft here, it's said to be loud here. Okay, I don't know where the decibel markings." The composer has their responsibility to put their expression down on paper, and then I have a responsibility to put it through my filter. And then it's what I said to Leslie Adams when we were talking about how to notate things. I said, you have to be very careful that putting down too many notations, it's that micromanaging of things. You have to accept they're gonna, if your work gets sung by many people, there are going to be some good performances and some not so good performances. That's the price of admission. Not every Andi Musique has been stellar. But Andi Musique has very, very minuscule amounts of indications of what to do.
Right.
We know what to do because you give breath and give opportunity for artistry to breathe. But if you micromanage, Copeland did that sort of thing, and Stravinsky, yes, do it, and I want it just this way. Well, then you do it. But if it's going to be art, then it's going to shift in some ways, and it may be in ways that you hadn't anticipated.
Well, and also, but there is also context around Andi Musique, because we know based on this sort of Western, canon, we know what to put on Schubert, and we don't yet know what to put on a new composer in terms of that, And so yes, I like that. I mean, it's every composer is going to do what they're going to do, I feel like, in terms of amount of markings and things like that. But it is, for me, it's about like, how do we feel like this responsibility? Okay, well, ask the composer what they meant. Exactly what you were saying,
Well, it's a responsibility, but it's an opportunity.
Yes.
It's an opportunity for us to interface. I mean, if I had the chance to sit down with Schubert and say, to have heard him play and hear how he carries things across bar lines and then changing modality and say, well, did you mean it this simplistically, or were you really intending what we all take to mean, that you're giving us room and space? There is a certain ambiguity in Schubert because while Lottie Lehman knew Strauss, but she didn't know Schubert. She knew some people that knew Schubert, and she knew you have that sort of continuity, and then there is the filter of those people.
Totally.
I think one of the things, and we talked about this a little bit ago, is like contemporary composers, living composers, we have several hundred years worth of Western European classical tradition. We have Baroque all the way through serialism, and contemporary composers can kind of pick and choose from those styles that they're like, this little bit, I'm going to have this movement be serial, whereas this other movement is going to be very heavily influenced by Strauss or Puccini or something, which I think is really incredible that we have the ability to make those artistic choices to more accurately represent, especially in art song, the text that we're trying to express. And I think this is something that I'm so grateful to Sam for. And I'm sure Daryl and Martha, you can talk about this more, but the opportunity to actually speak with and work with living composers, like even just sitting down and having a cocktail with them during our little composers and cocktails things has blown my mind, in that we actually now, both as all of us as performers, but as folks who can kind of put this information out in the world, have the opportunity to discuss those choices, the choice to use serialism, or the choice to use serialism or polyphony or monophony, whatever. We have the opportunity to discuss those with people who wrote the music that we perform, which helps us, I think, so much more and brings us so much more fulfillment and joy and truth to the performances that we do. And I think, I don't know, just talking to them, it makes me want more. It makes me want to talk to them more, have them write more, so that we can just expand that body of knowledge.
We're the first generation in history to have immediate visual access to the great minds of the world. It's never been in anywhere in I mean, you could take great sojourns. I mean, Bach went and took great long trips in order to be with Buxtehude and to go and study in Italy, had to go to Italy to study Italian style. And we here, our generation has the advantage and we've been forced, of course, to contend with it. I think that this whole COVID thing is going to mark the when we were forced to move into the 21st century. Before, everything was kind of following the whole 20th century model and a continuation of the 20th century model. But here going forward, who's going to only do send something to a pager anymore? There's for what reason? There's no reason to be cut off in that wise. And so with that, we have this opportunity. Composers have opportunities. They have the world is open to them for them to there's not a gatekeeper that keeps their works from being heard or from them being published or being disseminated. And the same thing with performers and scholars. So using this opportunity to reach across in these really vivid and active ways, I think it calls upon the composers and other creative types to be thinking in broader sweeps, to be thinking about the music. Does music have to just be relegated to the oral concept, or is there a visual that goes along with it? Is there we oftentimes hear music in colors, but here we now have the opportunity to actually have, the visual representation of things. It'll be interesting to see how this develops going forward.
Mm-hmm.
I think you hit on probably the most important. I mean, I love that idea that you said that this will mark the end of the 20th century in essence, 20 years later. I think it actually places a much greater responsibility because we have access. So that there is definitely no excuse in essence if because now we have 20 interviews of many composers now because of this, so we can find out, we don't actually, even if we don't sit down for a drink with a composer, in fact, we can read what he or she or they are saying and thinking. I did a little lecture for Songfest, in which I got to research, 5 21st century composers. And while I don't know Jessie Montgomery, I don't know her, we've never met, I was able to find, 16 different articles that talked about who she is and where she was raised and what her music has at its heart. What's the connection there? So that responsibility then, there's no excuse anymore for us to say, well, I can't afford to fly to, X country and do my research there. Well, that may be the case. And in some ways, in terms of learning an actual language for a singer, well, yes, we should go to the best place to do that is to, go to the country and consume the culture in that way. But if we're talking about our own culture, there's zero excuse.
Well, the only caveat there is, of course, that those people that are either resistant to technology for whatever reason, right, or hesitant about our older citizens, our families are. I don't want my grandmother to be picking up on the internet and clicking on every little ad and all that sort of thing. You're going to open yourself to taking advantage of. And so there is that hesitation to embrace things because I don't understand it, so therefore I'm going to avoid it. And then there, despite the fact that we have all this access, you have to convince some people that I have to convince people, to come on Facebook. So, I'm not so sure I like Facebook. I said, but that's where the world community is. That your community is. Yeah, but I don't want all my information to that. Yeah, but you don't have to put everything out there. Just because other people put everything out there, that's not the cost of admission. You don't have to put. I had to persuade my mother. She was lamenting that she couldn't see pictures of or what have you when I was traveling. I said, I post all the time. Yeah, but I don't use it. I said, well, it doesn't cost you too much to, and I created a profile for her. And she says, well, I'm not going to use it. I said, well, you can choose to use it or not to use it. But if you use it, you can then look on my profile and you'll be able to see in real time where I am. And, oh, he posted on yesterday. He must still be alive. As opposed to, expecting me to call every 5 minutes. I'm not going to,
That's hilarious. All joking aside, that's a historically age-old thing. When a huge societal transition like this happens, usually with technology or industry or anything like that, there's always resistance to change amongst part of the population. Often has to do with generational demarcations, and that's okay. We're all experimenting. Some people are naturally more interested and willing to jump 2 feet into the fray and figure it out. And with grace and empathy, we will try and combine and meld all these possibilities and bring along as many people as we can. I think you both are totally right, though, in that there's no going back. And you put it perfectly, Daryl. This has shoved us over into the 21st century line where we were dipping our toe before.
Absolutely.
And as I say, I think as an industry and a world, I still think we're very much metaphorically thrashing about figuring out what all this is and what it means. This is a long game here, but I think the end result is that we've been shoved into the pool without swimmies on.
Listen, and when the person figures out how to resolve the sound latency thing, and we're able to collaborate in real time, they have it to some degree, but everybody has to have the same equipment.
Right.
Accessibility. Once that is accessible to everybody as ubiquitously as everyone has a smartphone, the world will change. The world will change. Now, unfortunately, that also means that there are bad actors that will take advantage of that sort of thing as well. Every time they talk about me resizing my house for smart lock and smart this and that, they say, yeah, there's some other smarter people that will then know how to then access my whole house. And what if they decide to turn off my lights or turn off or open my door? I'm not so sure. I think I'd like to hold on to a key to open my door, and I'd like to hold on to that little bit of an older model of things. And I think that likewise that there will be the person that can figure out that sound latency problem is going to launch us even further into there will be no coming back. Who will ever, if I could sit in my living room and can collaborate with a pianist in New York, and we can make in real time expressive sorts of things. There's absolutely no, all the barriers are down. That currently we still have that sound latency barrier.
Well, and collaboration doesn't feel collaborative at all.
Yeah.
So with all that said, we will
make do.
And the end result, at least for our organizations, we will still seek to have the end goal be a communal, live in-person experience with all of this new stuff folded in and incorporated along the way, which is going to be absolutely amazing to watch. So that's a great place to end things. Thank you so much, Martha and Daryl, for coming and speaking with us. Everybody, thanks for watching. We popped the websites in the comments for Sparks and Wiry Cries and the African American Art Song Alliance. So please go check out both of these innovative and unique organizations. We're so grateful to these two leaders for having spoken with us. So thank you both.
Thank you, Sam, and thanks for your incredible work here with the Cincinnati initiative.
We're all in the same boat. Let's just keep talking and keep the dialogue open.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Martha. Thanks, Daryl. See everybody soon for our next Compose and Cocktails and webinars, and stay tuned for our next Coffee Convos roundtable discussion. Bye, everybody.